In this video, I'm going to show you a simple process that you can use in Excel to quickly and randomly divide a dataset into training and testing sets. Now, this is referred to as the train test data split process, and it's a fundamental step in the development of any predictive analytics model, particularly when you're working with a machine learning model, but it's also useful if you're building other models like a linear regression. So in general, the train test split process involves dividing your dataset into two parts, a training set and a test set, each serving distinct purposes in your model evaluation and validation. The training dataset is used by your model to learn the patterns and the relationships from its input features, and its outputs are what we refer to as its target labels. And the test dataset is used to evaluate your model's performance on unseen data, providing you with an estimate of its ability to generalize and produce good, reliable future predictions. Now, there are some common split ratios that people will use, but ultimately it comes down to how much data you have. The default that most go with is an 80-20 split, where 80% is used for training and 20 for testing. But if you have a really large data set, you can use a 70-30, and if you have a smaller data set, you can go with a 90-10. For this example, we're going to use an 80-20 split. It's also important that you split your data set using random selection. Now, randomly shuffling the data set before you split it ensures that both your training and test data sets are representative of the entire data set and prevents biased model evaluation. Now, a caveat here is if you're using time series data, you're not going to want to randomly divide it into training and testing. Instead, you want to preserve the time series. So for example, if you were working with data where you had 5 years of data, I might say the first 4 years, I'll use that for training, and that last year, the most recent year in my series, I'll use for testing. And that's a good way to train your model on the seasonality and the trends of that data over that year period, and then make sure that that is actually factored into your testing as well. So if you're using a programming language like Python, it's really easy to randomly sample your data set because there's a bunch of pre-written functions that accomplish this for you. But in Excel, it's a little bit more involved, but still relatively easy. So before we jump into this train test split process, I did want to show you another really great data wrangling trick in Excel that you can use to quickly remove records with blank values. So the data set I'm working with here is California house pricing data, and I'm looking to predict my median house value using this set of independent variables. But before I do that, I need to do a little bit of cleaning, and I need to divide this data into train and test. So starting off with a little bit of data wrangling, this data is pretty complete, but there is the presence of some blanks. And the way that I can see this quickly is by using the Excel function count blank. So I'll just type right here, count blank. And then I'll just select this whole data set using Control-Shift over and then Control-Shift down and then close parentheses. And so I can see here there's a presence of 207 blank values on my data set. Now, I don't know if those are, because this data set's pretty large, it's got a total of over 20,000 records in it. I can visually scan through this, but I don't know if those blanks are entirely blank records or if they're kind of sparse throughout like a checkered board pattern in the data. So another way to quickly identify blanks in your data set is using conditional formatting. So I'm just going to select this whole data set here and then go to conditional formatting, highlight cell rules, and then down at the bottom, you have more rules here. And I'm going to change this to blanks, and I'm going to format it with a red fill, just like this. So real bright red fill, and hit OK. And so now if I visually scan through the data here, we'll see that there's just some random blanks spread throughout. And it looks like it's mostly in this one column, but it might be in multiple columns. So if I want to get rid of any record that has a blank like this, well, I could manually go through and just right click and delete the row. And you'll see at the top, we started with 207 blanks and now we have 206, but that's not very efficient. Now to actually select all the blanks in my data set quickly, what I can do is again, select the whole range here of my data. And then I'm going to hit F5 and then click here on special and select blanks. And this will go to any cells that are blank and select them as opposed to selecting all of the data. So I go ahead and hit OK. And you'll see here, if you scroll down, that any cell that's red is currently selected. And so now what I'm going to do is go to my home ribbon here and then go to delete and then delete sheet rows. And what that'll do is it'll iteratively go through, and for any cell that's selected here that's blank, it'll delete the entire row. So now if I go back up the top of my data set and check my count blanks, we can see that it's now equal to 0 and we're ready to go. So now on to the train test split. So the best way to do this is to generate a random number and then preserve its value and sort the data. So how we're going to do this is I'm going to create a new column called random, and then I'm going to use Excel's rand function, which doesn't take any parameters, to generate a random number. And then I'm going to go ahead and right fill for the entire data set. So if I scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll see I have random values for every single record in my data set. Now, once I have that random value, what I'm going to do is you'll notice that if I go in here and rerun this formula, it regenerates all the numbers for the entire data set. And so I want to preserve this actual value, because what I'm going to do is after I preserve the value, I'm going to sort it based on this random number, which effectively is randomly selecting values in the data set. And then I'm just going to pull out a block of 20% of the records. So what we're going to do here is I'm just going to come here and I'm going to copy this whole column and then right click and go to paste special. And I'm going to select the values. So you'll see down here, paste special values. And what that's going to do is now, instead of the rand function in the cell, it's just the random value that was originally generated. Once I have that random value preserved, what I'm going to do is select the entire table. And then I'm going to go to the data tab and then to sort. And then I'm going to sort by the random column, smallest to largest or largest to smallest. It doesn't matter, because here's the thing. By sorting it by this random number, we are randomly shuffling all the data. So if there was some sort of structure or order to the data originally, that's going to be completely eliminated by organizing it either smallest to largest or largest to smallest. Then what I want to do here, you can see all these numbers now go from lowest to largest. I'm going to go ahead and select, and it doesn't matter where I select them necessarily. I could select from the top, I could select from the bottom, I could select from the middle, but I want to select 80% of my records. So with those records sorted, now what I want to do is select roughly 20% of the records. So I have 20,434 records. So roughly 4,000 is going to be the number of records I want to pull out. And again, you don't have to be exact. You can be approximate about this selection. It's a roughly 80-20 split. So what I'm going to do here is if I just take 20,434 and subtract 4,000, that brings me in right around 16,000, let's call it 400 records. And so I'm just going to scroll up here until I get to row 16,400. And so just scrolling up here, 16,000, again, right around 400 there. And I'm just going to select this first cell and Control Shift down. And down here at the count, I can see my count is roughly 4,000 records. And so then I'm just going to hold down Shift and go over. And then what I'm going to do is just right click and cut. And then I'm going to go over to a new worksheet and I'm going to paste it here in the second row, because now what I'm going to do is go back here, go back to the top, and I'm just going to select my column headings and I'm going to paste them here. Now, we don't really need to preserve this random value now. We can go ahead and delete these columns. And then what I'm going to do here is just rename this sheet training. And then this sheet is my testing data set. So there you have it, a quick and easy way in Excel to remove any records of blank values and randomly divide your data set into training and testing.